Welcome to Bidgely Engage Plus. Today we're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and joining us is Dr. Elizabeth Cook, General Manager, Advanced Grid Solutions for Duquesne Light. Today we'll be discussing using data to derive value to advance utility decisions on both the grid and the customer side of the house. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for joining us here today. We're really excited to talk to you. So we're not in Duquesne Light's building. We're in an adjacent space.
Right, we're actually in a building called the Energy Innovation Center, and it is a project that has been developed over the last 10 years or so by Pittsburgh Gateways. It's a nonprofit organization that took an old trade school that was abandoned and redeveloped it to really bring in the different energy businesses that are within the Pittsburgh space to kind of have that synergies with each other. So the University of Pittsburgh has space here, and as of last year, we entered Duquesne Light into a partnership agreement where we're working with the University of Pittsburgh, working with the students, and having access to the power lab that is here.
Very cool. And so as a Duquesne Light customer and a Pittsburgh native, what this space represents to me in your partnership, with not only the building, but Pitt, what it represents is an evolving industry in an evolving city. And so, Pittsburgh has its roots in kind of blue collar steel production, and it has evolved to a town of innovation and technology and healthcare, as well as grid mod.
I have a handful of passions, and one of them is history. And so the one thing really cool about the city of Pittsburgh is the history of our grid. One of the founding fathers is George Westinghouse, who was right there with Thomas Edison when he was developing the grid in New York. And it was the battle between alternating current, direct current, that was happening right here. And so I get to work on that power grid. And let's just say some assets and really how the grid has been built was based off of that ideology and that innovation. So even if you look at the history of Duquesne Light from an innovation perspective, we're always kind of advancing in that area in ways that I think not a lot of people realize. I think one thing about the electric utility space is, it is a 140-year-old grid, industry. How we developed it and built it out for the first 70 years was all about expansion, going bigger, being more efficient. And really, we tapped out that capability in the late 70s. And now we have this very robust, conservative machine that then for the next 50 years was steady Eddie. And our load growth started to really plateau because we all became more energy efficient, even though we all bought 5 televisions for our homes. However, we have not had to really build the grid out holistically. And really, this is how it's done, is really the safe, de-risked type of approach. So change is hard. I think as an industry, though, it's becoming more exciting. I have to say, my friends and my family ask me more about the power grid than they ever have in the last 2 years. And I think it's all the attention of transportation electrification. Is the grid going to blow up because of all of these new vehicles? Really gives you an opportunity to talk about it.
I think it often is forgotten, that some of the infrastructure and the mindset that was put in place many decades ago was really built on the mindset of safe, reliable power. And the need for that remains, but the challenges of the grid, the demands of the customer have evolved significantly. And one of the things that I think we have struggled with as an industry from an evolution standpoint is about, hardware versus software, 100% accuracy versus 90% accuracy. And when we work with large data sets, we're not talking about perfection. We're talking about, a more massive or a more broad approach to analysis. So how do you get over that hurdle?
I think that is another big element of change. However, when we're talking about large systems with a vast amount of data, to get us started, you have to have a ground truth and then build from that ground truth. And I think that capability to pick that first variable or pick that first set of information is very challenging for engineers and beings in themselves. Engineers hate to say that you can't be perfect. And if you tell that to any engineers, don't worry, it doesn't have to be perfect, that sets them back significantly. So really having industry concrete data to say a 5% error or a 10% error is industry standard, right? Those are the things that kind of help us move along. But being that we're in a world that has yet to be defined, those numbers really aren't at the fingertips of those that are doing this work. So it really is just a way of thinking and being innovative and, challenging and, beating up the models, to understand. And I guess I'll just peel back that. So when you think about all the different groups in a utility, everyone thinks real-time operations. And if the data isn't right in regards to that operator making a decision to turn a breaker on or off or a switch on or off, or de-energizing a portion of the circuit so that the truck that arrives, that circuit is de-energized. There's this significant desire, of course, for the men and the women to be safe, so that accuracy is very important. But when you peel back the onion to the asset management or to the planning groups, that accuracy from a planning perspective or an awareness doesn't need to be as perfect. So that's another game you have to play when you're kind of driving the vision across the utility, is knowing your space and when perfection is needed and when it's not.
So, beyond your day job at Duquesne Light, you also serve as the chair of the AEIC Distributed Energy Resources Subcommittee. And curious, as the chair of that subcommittee, what are you seeing, from a, challenge and opportunity perspective as it relates to the grid edge, adoption of distributed resources, and maybe most notable to our conversation, all of the data that will be coming off of those resources?
Yes, so my role in the DER subcommittee has been extremely valuable. And I think, one of the coolest thing about our industry is because we're all operating our own mini grids, the ability to share that knowledge and that information and really what works and doesn't work is very fluid. So having the opportunity to meet all of the different utility members that are doing pretty much the same job that I'm doing has been incredibly valuable to bring that knowledge here to Pittsburgh and then share that within. And so we have a very large network at the AIC, 30 plus utility members show up at our regular meetings, and then that networking creates a conversation after we leave each other. And I have to say, the most that we end up talking about is the grid modernization journey. So it is distributed energy resources, but really what that leads us to is how are we preparing for the grid edge to be electrified? As we kind of talked about earlier, the grid has been built, and we really didn't need to know what was happening after the substation fence. The electrons flowed one way down to the edge, and we served our customers. We didn't really need to know when they were turning lights on or what they were doing, because it was an Ohm's law calculation that you could do in the back of the envelope and really make the decision on conductor and transformer size. However, over the last 15 years, some utilities have experienced these pains more than some others based on regulatory environment and who's driving what technology at the edge. So we get to learn from those who have gone before us. And so what's happening is now you have assets or devices, technology, being connected into our customer and commercial industrial residencies. So now that power flow is two-way. So everything about the distribution grid is now dynamic, and it's distributed, it's intermittent, and you just don't actually know because we never needed to know. So we talk a lot about, understanding what these new assets are. So how does the battery energy storage work? How does the solar panels work? How does electric vehicle charging? Can vehicle to grid actually help us? Can we see homes and buildings as an asset in themselves? So have the ability to manage how, be it the utility space, a third party, or even the customer, right? Everyone kind of can now play a part in how they use energy, which is not something that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago. The importance of having that information and creating these profiles of who our customers are so that we can provide them value before they even ask for it. And I think that's, a place that we're sitting that's not very familiar to the electric utility who has served the one-way power flow and did not care if you turned your lights on or off.
Your last point about, essentially providing value before they ask for it. And that's a very new concept to utilities, about engaging customers in a proactive way, in a deeper way, to give them value that is going to shift. It's going to shift as they adopt electric vehicles, as they install batteries and solar, and their expectation of the utility shifts as well. And so how do you take that mindset, which is a relatively new one for utilities, and bring that back into your work within Duquesne Light?
Yeah, so it is definitely a dynamic shift in how we think, as a utility, our job is safe, reliable power, ensure those electrons. And our expectation of the customers is really predictable. They wake up, they go to work, they come home. Now knowing that they will be using their energy differently, having the understanding of how they will use that energy is something unknown, not only to us, but probably to them. So is there ways that we can create a value that they don't understand would help them? So for instance, like think about Amazon. You get on Amazon, it starts to learn your behaviors and really starts to feed you information that you ultimately want to buy. Well, like what if we could start creating from the data of how the energy is being used, how that customer could use their energy in a way that would benefit them, not actually sell them something that they don't need to buy, but really use those algorithms, that intelligence for good. How can we start looking at those homes as little mini grids, playing into a smaller grid, playing into a much bigger grid, so that we can, instead of just building bigger and more capacity and larger transformers, is really breaking the grid into many of many. So instead of just the one circuit, it comes down to that one small wire lateral and a cluster of homes being treated as a part of the grid that can really turn it on and turn it off.
So I love the expression many of many. And at Bidgely, we often use the term segment of one, meaning, each customer is quite unique. And never before in the utility space did we really need to consider them that way, but now we do. With the adoption of electric vehicles, the adoption of storage and solar, the equation has changed. And therefore, the relationship between the utility and the customer has changed as well. And so I think that shift, that dynamic from ratepayer to average Joe to customer that is unique in that moment in time on that grid and providing them proactive, insightful, useful information through a channel that they can digest, whether that's email or web or text. That's where the value lies.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, another dynamic shift that's happening within the utility space is the customer group and their desire for this data and this information. So that when a customer does call, they have the information at their fingertips to really respond to that individual as an individual. And that's something that we have not had in the past either.
Let me totally shift gears to another aspect of your life, which is integrated well-being. And so, how have you taken some of your work that you have demonstrated on your blog and your podcast about integrating well-being into your personal life and adopted that into your professional life?
When we think about mind, body, spirit, how we show up every day is the energy we choose to provide to others. No pun intended with energy. We are energy. I work with energy. And so I just see it as a way of me showing up as a leader, a servant leadership, and creating this place that when they wake up, they want to come work and we want to do great things and move us forward. So that's kind of how I channel it into my work. And hopefully, it's resonating with not only those that I lead, but maybe people that, I don't indirectly lead.
I certainly think it does. And I'll just speak from personal experience. I mean, your words on your blog resonate. Your words now resonate with me. And something that stands out, and I think brings us back to the first question, is about passion. And to me, passion is the driver of change. And if you don't have that personal passion and that desire to motivate others in the same way, how can we ever change? Duquesne is a relatively small but mighty utility, and I think pretty progressive in the grand scheme of things. And you, as a driver of much of that change and what we've talked about today, are there aspects of what you're doing at Duquesne Light, or aspects of what you see more broadly through AIAC that maybe others that aren't as far on the path could learn from?
My advice for utilities as they enter into this data journey, and really, there is a significant amount of data that's now becoming available to all of us. One, it is intimidating, but just start small. +1, +1, +1. And then also, what data do you have? And then what data can you gain is questions that should be asked, and do not judge it. Then also really embrace the idea that, it does not have to be perfect to create progress, that you have to have ground truths and you have to build from that ground truth in many ways. Do not limit your use cases, really think big. Others have done it. So reach out to this industry that literally share and we're really good at it, and hear what they're doing and build from that knowledge.
Well, thanks so much for your time, Liz. I learned a lot. I think others will learn a lot. I think there's a tremendous amount to take away today, but one thing particular would be, data-driven value. Use data-driven value to, institute change throughout your organization, whether that is with a utility or elsewhere. I think that's a mindset that we could all benefit from. So thanks again.
I look forward to continuing this journey with you.
I do as well. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Bidgely Engage Plus. We'll see you next time.